Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. We've no guests tonight, so it's just me running through your top stories of the day. As always, we start with a Ukraine update. It's day 568. Ukraine claims to have destroyed a Russian air defense system near the town of Yevpatoria in occupied Crimea in an overnight drone and missile attack, which was conducted by the Security Service of Ukraine and the Navy on Thursday morning. The claim was made to Reuters by a Ukrainian intelligence source. The Ukrainian source told Reuters that the drones blinded a Russian Triumph air defense system by attacking its radar and antenna. The Navy then fired 2 Ukrainian-made Neptune cruise missiles at the system's launch complexes, the source said. The Neptune anti-ship missile has been modified to attack ground targets, military analysts say. Ukraine's Air Force has claimed that it downed 17 out of 22 Russian drones over its territory overnight. The Russian military claimed it has destroyed 5 Ukrainian drone boats that were trying to attack a patrol ship in the Black Sea earlier today. The Russian Defense Ministry said the unmanned boats were destroyed by fire from the ship's standard weapons, while repelling the attack on the Sergei Kotov about 5 a.m. A 6-year-old boy was killed and 4 more people were injured in a Russian shelling in the village of Novomotrivka in the Kherson region. Roman Starovoyt, the governor of the Russian region of Kursk, has reported that 1 person has been killed by Ukrainian cross-border shelling on the village of Tyotkino. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko is traveling to Russia for talks with Vladimir Putin on Friday. Russia has said it's expelling 2 U.S. diplomats accused of working with the Russian national who was accused of collaborating with a foreign state. Kim Jong-un invited Vladimir Putin to his country during their meeting in Russia, and Putin has accepted, Pyongyang's state media KCNA reported today. The invitation came after the North Korean leader offered the Russian president his support for Russia's sacred war against the West during the talks at Space Base in Russia's Far East. The talks also touched on the possible Russian help with North Korea's space program. Romanian officials have said new fragments of a drone similar to those used by Russian armies have been found near its border. Romanian specialist teams were deployed to the eastern county of Tulcea, where the fragments were spread over an area of several dozen meters, the Defense Ministry said. Preliminary analysis of the first 2 drone fragments had shown that they did not explode in Romania and were not carrying explosives. Moving on to the next story, back at home in Scotland. Scotland has been found to be more welcoming to immigrants. The Migration Policy Scotland Attitude Survey found that attitudes in Scotland are often different from those UK-wide polls. 28% of Scots want to see immigration numbers reduced and 38% would like to see them increase. This contrasts the recent Ipsos UK poll, which found 48% in favour of a reduction and 22% in favour of an increase. This is also very different from the last Migration Observatory Scottish poll in 2014, when 58% wanted a reduction and just 10% favoured an increase in migration. Well over half of Scots believe that immigration has a positive impact on Scotland, and 48% believe it has had a positive impact in their local area. Migration Policy Scotland say they have found people in Scotland much more likely to agree with positive statements and disagree with negative claims about the economic, social, cultural, and demographic impacts of migration. Despite 46% of people saying no social contact with immigrants, Scots are strongly positive on diversity. 74% agree that diversity is good for Scotland, and 61% believe a mix of different people make an area more enjoyable to live. The Migration Policy Scotland reports key findings are that the impacts of immigration are seen as positive by the majority of people in Scotland. This is true of impacts at both Scotland as a whole and the local level. People in Scotland have a strong preference for labour migrants to have the option to remain in Scotland for the longer term to settle and integrate. A greater proportion of the Scottish public want immigration to be increased rather than decreased, although those wanting an increase mainly support a modest increase, while those wanting immigration to decrease want it to be reduced a lot. A sizable portion want immigration to stay at the same level. Countries and companies planning to expand their fossil fuel productions are taking very unhealthy and unwise economic risks as their investment may not be profitable, the world's foremost energy advisor has warned. Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, the IEA, predicted this week that fossil fuels would peak this decade, which would be a historic turning point for the climate. But despite the likelihood of declining demand and the threat of climate chaos, many countries and private sector companies are considering new capacity. Birol said, new large-scale fossil fuel projects are not only carrying major climate risks, but also business and financial risks for the companies and their investors. When I talk with the oil companies, both international and national, some of them are saying that we have been underinvesting in oil and gas, but companies and investors should be very careful about this claim, bearing in mind the demand trajectories that we are seeing. It could lead them into taking very unhealthy, unwise economic and climate risks. Governments should be urgently discussing the phasing out of fossil fuels at COP28, the forthcoming UN climate summit, Birol has said. The question of phasing out was dropped at last year's COP, but many countries plan to reignite the debate this year. But even with governments' current climate policies, which are inadequate and need to be toughened, the amount of oil and gas needed globally will decline, Birol noted. He refused to single out any country, but several developed and developing economies are planning large expansions of their fossil fuel production, despite their commitments to limiting global temperature rises to 1.5 centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The US just this week was found to be planning the world's biggest share of global oil and gas expansion between now and 2025, and the UK government plans to score new oil and gas licenses as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak vowed to max out the North Sea. Several countries and companies planning expansions have cited findings from the IEA that oil and gas will still be needed in the future, even when the world reaches the net zero greenhouse gas emissions as justification for their plans. Birol warned that they were not taking on board the IEA's full advice. We will definitely need oil and gas in years and years to come, but the issue is the amount of oil and gas that we need globally will be less and less. Birol applauded the proposed commitment to triple global renewable energy capacity, likely to be the centerpiece of COP28, which will take place from late November in Dubai. But he said this commitment was insufficient and the rapid decline of fossil fuels was also needed to keep the world within 1.5 degrees. Warnings that the price of renewable energy could rise were overdone, Birol indicated. There may be many zigzags on the price, but overall trend is that they are competitive with fossil fuels and will be even more competitive in the future, he said. Solar is very competitive and offshore wind is making big steps. Soon we will see it competitive as well. Although he has forecast that fossil fuels will peak time for the first time in this decade, Birol said much more needed to be done by governments to ensure that its use declined far more steeply than afterwards. The most important issue is not the peak, but the decline of fossil fuels after the peak, and that is the nerve center of the problem. Current policies will lead to global heating of 2.4 centigrade and must be toughened as a matter of urgency, he said. Staying with the UK post-Brexit investments are just 1/3 of lost EU funds. This comes from new public sector lenders created by the UK government since Brexit are investing 2/3 less in the UK than before Brexit. The new report from the European Investment Bank has found. Over more than 4 decades, the EIB backed UK projects ranging from the Channel Tunnel to the Manchester Metrolink to offshore wind farms and upgrading the national grid. The think tank UK in Changing Europe has compared the EIB's record with the work of new Treasury-backed institutions, including the UK Infrastructure Bank, the UKIB. The EIB invested an average of £6.4 billion in the UK between 2009 and 2016 in real terms, peaking at £7.5 billion in 2016, the year of the Brexit referendum. By contrast, the successor institution created by the government, including the Leeds-based UKIB, invested £4.2 billion in 2022, a third as much as the EIB was spending 6 years earlier. It's not clear that the UK's domestic development banks will be able to fill that hole left by the EIB by the end of the decade. They lack the staff, expertise, inhibiting them from scaling up operations quickly, said Stephen Hunsaker, who co-authored the report with Peter Jurkovic. Nor have they achieved the coveted AAA credit rating of the EIB. Consequently, they lend at higher rates, making it more expensive to lend to public interest projects. The new institutions, which include the Scottish National Investment Bank, the Development Bank of Wales, and the British Business Bank, also appeared to be less focused on infrastructure projects than the EIB. Between them, they invested just 17% as much as infrastructure projects in 2022 as the EIB did before it began winding down its links with the UK. The UK, in a Changing Europe report titled The Investment Gap, argues that the UKIB's growth will be constrained by strict Treasury limits on lending imposed to protect taxpayers' money. The public sector lenders, such as the EIB, aim to harness the lower borrowing costs and longer time horizons of governments to back projects that private investors deem too risky. By providing certainty that a project will go ahead, they can crowd in private funding. The analysis shows that the EIB projects were not evenly spread across the UK. Between 2010 and 2019, the bank invested £558 per capita in Scotland and £773 a head in London, against £180 in Yorkshire and the Humber, for example. The research finds the only sector in which the domestically backed banks have matched EU institutions is in lending to small and medium-sized businesses. Staying with finance, the European Central Bank has raised interest rates to the highest level since the launch of the euro to tackle stubbornly high inflation, despite fears over a slowdown across the single currency bloc. This marks the 10th consecutive rate rise for the bank, as the ECB warned inflation remained too high, even as the impact of previous increases and a weakening outlook for global trade weigh on the Eurozone economy. The latest increase pushes the ECB's deposit rate, which is paid on commercial bank deposits, from 3.75% to 4%, the highest since the euro was launched in 1999. Its main refinancing options, which provide the bulk of liquidity to the banking system, was increased from 4.25% to 4.5%. The marginal lending facility, which offers overnight credit to banks, was also increased by a quarter point to 4.75%. The decision comes as global investors predict the world's most powerful central banks are close to the end of the most aggressive rate hiking cycle in decades after inflation surged after the COVID pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Economists anticipate one further increase from the Bank of England when its policy makers meet next week, and expect the US Federal Reserve to leave borrowing costs unchanged despite an uptick in inflation last month driven by higher energy costs. Christine Lagarde, the ECB's president, hinted that rates may have peaked, while suggesting borrowing costs would remain high for as long as necessary to bring inflation down to the central bank's 2% target. Inflation across the Eurozone remains stuck above 5%, while the ECB's forecast it would drop to 3.2% in 2024, higher than previously anticipated before a drop to 2.1% in 2025. At 4%, the ECB's interest rate is well below the UK, which has risen 14 times to 5.5%, and UK inflation remains relatively high at 6.8%. Some Scottish news figures released today show the value of Scotland's goods exports are growing at a faster rate than for the UK as a whole. The HMRC regional trade statistics relate to international trade in goods only, including oil and gas for the second quarter of 2023. They showed that compared to the previous year, the value of Scotland's international goods exports increased by 12.6% to 36.7 billion in the year ending June 2023. For the UK as a whole, goods exports increased by 12.2%. When oil and gas are excluded, Scotland had an increase of 13.2% compared to a 12% growth experienced by the rest of the UK. There was strong growth in the value of drinks export, which was up £829 million, which is 17.1%. Commenting on the statistics, Trade Minister Richard Lochhead said, "These figures show a strong performance for Scotland's exports despite these very challenging economic times. They are a testament to the resilience and quality of Scottish businesses and highlight the success of our export growth plan, which aims to increase the value of our exports to 25% of GDP by 2029. Exports boost and grow the economy, creating jobs. They are a key part of our national strategy for economic transformation, and we continue to develop Scotland's world-class expertise in areas such as life sciences, renewables, digitech and food and drink, and through initiatives such as the Scottish Government Innovation Strategy." Down south in England, Scotland Yard has apologised and paid substantial damages to two women arrested during the vigil for Sarah Everard in a major climb down following years of a legal battle over the policing of the event. In a move that the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley hopes draw a line under one of the darkest periods of the Met's recent history, the force acknowledgement that it was understandable that Patsy Stevenson and Dania Al-Obeid had wanted to attend a candlelit vigil at Clapham Common because they felt that women had been badly let down. The women told the media that the apology was hard-won and was welcome, but vowed to continue to speak up about police abuse and fight for better policing for violence against women and girls. The women both attended their vigil for Sarah Everard, who was kidnapped, raped and murdered by a serving Metropolitan Police officer in March 2021 when COVID restrictions on large gatherings were in place. The image of Stevenson being pinned to the floor by officers as she was arrested sparked widespread fury and distrust among women, while the Met's actions at the vigil saw it and its then Commissioner Cressida Dick widely criticised. A 2021 Police Inspectorate review into the event called the Met's conduct absolutely right. The pair launched legal claims against the Met under the Human Rights Act after prosecutors halted attempts by the Met to bring prosecutions against them and four others. In letters to the two women from Commander Karen Finlay, the Met acknowledged that even during COVID, their fundamental right to protest remained. The settlements followed damning findings by the Casey Review into the standards of behaviour and internal culture of the Met. The Casey Review said the force that had behaved characteristic defensiveness, internal focus and lack of humility, both in policing of the event and the decision afterwards to pursue those who were arrested and appeal against the decision by the High Court that found it unlawful for them to have tried to prevent the original vigil. Moving internationally to Germany, an AfD politician is to stand trial charged with using banned Nazi slogans. Björn Höcke, a leading member of Germany's far-right Alternative für Deutschland party, is to stand trial charged with using a banned Nazi phrase. The chair of the AfD in the eastern state of Thuringia is accused of intentionally deploying a slogan used by the Nazi Party's paramilitary wing, the SA, in a speech at a campaign rally in May 2021. Höcke is accused of having closed his speech with the phrase, "everything for Germany," knowing of its associations when he said it. Under German law, the use of symbols, propaganda, slogans linked to anti-constitutional organizations such as the Nazi Party or other terrorist organizations is banned in all but historical and educational contexts. The charges against Höcke coincided with a poll in the northern state of Brandenburg that showed the AfD to be leading there for the first time. Asked which party they would vote for if there was an election on Sunday, 32% of respondents said the AfD, followed by 20% for the Social Democrats and 18% for the Christian Democrats. Brandenburg, which goes into polls next year, is now the fourth state in which the party is leading. Höcke's speech was delivered to an audience at a party rally of around 250 people in Merseburg, in the state of Saxony-Anhalt. The full slogan he used was "everything for our homeland, everything for Saxony-Anhalt, and everything for Germany." A spokesperson for Halle Regional Court in Saxony-Anhalt said it had given the go-ahead for prosecutors to proceed with charges against Höcke. Höcke is forbidden from trying to override the decision for the case to go to court. No trial date has been set yet. His lawyer has previously said his client's use of the slogan did not warrant a prosecution. Last week, legislators voted in favor of removing Höcke's parliamentary immunity over separate charges of criminal incitement after prosecutors alleged that he had incited racial hatred in 2022 when he linked Muslim immigrants with a violent attack in the southwest city of Ludwigshafen. As a rule, members of state parliament are protected against prosecutions, and only a parliamentary committee's ruling can allow criminal investigations and charges to go ahead against them. Höcke belongs to the folkish nationalist Flügel wing of the AfD, which has been categorized as by domestic intelligence as verified right-wing extremist. He has regularly made headlines in the past for his outspoken views, including stoking revisionist theories over Germany's Nazi past. In 2018, he referred to the Holocaust Memorial in central Berlin as a monument of shame. He has previously said that Germany had to perform a 180-degree turn in terms of how it recalled the past, suggesting a more positive, celebratory take on its history was required. A poll carried out by research firm Infratest DMAP has suggested that the biggest political threat to the AfD is from the far left. The poll showed that 44% of Brandenburg voters would welcome the formation of a new left-wing party. Back to Scotland, and the first reports from the census of March 2022 has been published. The population of Scotland was estimated to be 5,436,600. This is the largest population ever recorded in Scotland's census. The population grew by 141,200, which is 2.7% since the previous census in 2011. This is a slower rate of growth than between 2001 and 2011, when the population grew by 4.6%. The other UK censuses showed higher rates of population growth than in Scotland. In England and Wales, the population increased by 6.3% between 2011 and 2021. In Northern Ireland, the population increased by 5.1% over the same period. Since 2011 census, there were 585,000 births and 634,800 deaths registered in Scotland. Without migration, the population would have decreased by about 49,800. But the population has grown because people have moved to Scotland rather than moved out. There were 2,794,900 women, which is 51.4% of the population, leaving 48.6%, which is 2,641,800 males. This is similar to 2011, when the census showed that it was 51.5% female and 48.5% male. Commenting, Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture Angus Robertson said, "Today's publication represents a historic moment for the largest population ever recorded by Scotland's census of 5.4 million, an increase of 2.7% since its previous census in 2011. It has also confirmed this growth has been driven by inward migration, demonstrating Scotland is an attractive place to come and live and work. However, we know Scotland faces an ongoing population challenge with fewer births than deaths registered in Scotland since 2011, which reinforces how damaging Brexit continues to be for Scotland with the loss of freedom of movement. This census also shows that, in line with many other countries, our population is aging. Understanding these challenges in the population will allow local authorities and the government to adapt vital public services to better meet the needs of those living and working in Scotland, including our large established migrant community, whose contribution we greatly welcome. As outlined in the programme for government, we will publish an Addressing Depopulation Action Plan, which will set out the first phase of our response to population decline occurring in some of Scotland's communities. We will also introduce a talent attraction and migration service to support more people to live and work here. We have also called on the UK government to devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Parliament and work with us to deliver our proposal for a rural visa pilot to enable rural and island communities to attract migrants in line with local needs. The census also shows a trend towards smaller households and more households overall, which further demonstrates the importance of our strategy to tackle social isolation and loneliness through stronger social connections and our continued funding for organisations working to address this issue. Staying with the Scottish Parliament, it has agreed to consider amendments to the legislation that will incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. The UNCRC Scotland Bill requires Scotland's public authorities to protect children's rights in their decision-making. It also allows for children, young people and their representatives to use the courts to enforce their rights. The bill was passed unanimously in 2021, but certain provisions within it were later ruled out with the Scottish Parliament's legislative competence at the Supreme Court. Proposed changes will mean that public authorities will be required to comply with the UNCRC requirements only when delivering devolved functions conferred by or under acts of Scottish Parliament or under common law powers. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "Our priority is to provide the greatest protection that we can for our children's rights. The amendments that will now be considered will ensure that the bill protects children's rights in the most effective way within our devolved powers. This is an important milestone as in ensuring that we are a country that fully respects, protects and fulfills children's rights. However, without the political commitment of the UK government to legislate for children's rights, we are limited in what we can achieve. The simplest way to secure the greatest protection for children's rights would be for our counterparts in Westminster to incorporate the UNCRC into UK law." Some more good news coming out of Scotland. Scotland's women's national team and the Scottish FA have agreed that the women's national team will withdraw their legal action as they say they have resolved the women's demands to be treated on an equal basis to the men's national team, particularly in respect of commercial appearances, prize money distribution, and resources. The detail of what was agreed are not disclosed. Rachel Coursey, from the Scotland women's team, said, "I am glad that we have been able to find a resolution, avoiding the need for a tribunal. The legal route is one that no one wanted to take, but positive discussions have taken place during the intervening period with mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation. As captain, I believe we have a responsibility to push for the highest standards on and off the field. The Scottish FA has made significant inroads in this regard, and together we are on an evolutionary journey. We are proud to have parity, not just for the current generation, but more significantly for future generations of players." Ian Maxwell, the Scottish FA chief executive, said, "The growth of women's football is one of the Scottish FA's highest strategic priorities. We have reiterated our commitment to equality, specifically with regard to commercial appearances, prize money distribution, and resources. We must now look forward with a shared goal to return to major tournaments, working together to bring success on the field that will turn to encourage broadcasters and rights holders to do more to bridge the value gap that remains the biggest obstacle on the journey to equality within the women's game globally." The SFA and the women's national team said that they are focusing their collective efforts on qualifications for the UEFA Euro 2025, continuing to accelerate the growth of girls' and women's games and inspiring the nation. Well, that's the final story for you, so that's it for this evening. Before you tune out, I just want to remind you, of course, at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters, our lovely viewers. So to everyone who's donated so far and to everyone who signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programmes, of course, will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We still have our goal to reach £30,000 to pay our bills, and this is a very pressing need. However, the generosity of our supporters has given us just a little bit more time. We have now raised £16,950, and we are able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks. But we really need to raise the remaining 13,000, and this is a really urgent need. So if you can support, the link is in our bio. I'm Saoirse Healey, good night, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healey.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.